What's cracking, everybody? You're back with Mr. Berger, and tonight we're going to be taking a look at this Golem Electro Dragon Beatdown deck. Now, Golem is a huge fun archetype to play, and when I say archetype, and I say that just about one card, because he basically sets the whole archetype by being in that deck. If you have a Golem in your deck, you're basically playing a Golem Beatdown deck. There's pretty much no way around it, you know? There's not really any such thing as a Golem cycle deck, at least nothing that really works out. Because he's just such a massive tank that it just makes the decks completely revolved around that. And there's a lot of ways that you can complement him, and a lot of different things that can contribute him. And in this particular case, you're actually taking advantage of that Electro Dragon. The Electro Dragon is definitely still viable in some decks. It was super popular when it first came out, for a while for sure. And, you know, of course, just like most cards, they're really powerful when they first come out. Not all cards are like that, but they, you know, more often than not, that's the case, you know. So, with the Electro Dragon, that was definitely the case. He was pretty strong. You know, he's an epic, so not everybody had him. And I didn't face him too much, but a lot of the professional players and people with higher trophies and, you know, that win grand challenges and stuff were talking about how he was really powerful and they kind of needed to nerf him. So they did that nerf, and he kind of fell off the map a bit. But here and there, he's still pretty viable. It's not one of those cards that just got nerfed into complete oblivion and then you never see it again, right? It's definitely still in a few decks, and the fact that it has that chain lightning effect and the stun effect still make it a viable card. Now, there's a lot of units that have the stun effect nowadays. You know, you got the E-Wiz is the traditional one, and then you have the Zappies, and now you got the E-Drag, and then of course you count the Zap and the Lightning, those spells stun as well. But the E-Drag is kind of the newest one, and you definitely have a huge benefit of having that stun effect in this deck with your Golem as your main win condition. I'll get to that in a little bit here. So I found this deck again as usual, or as often, on Clash with Ash. I also found it on Royale API, which is another one of my huge sources for finding especially meta decks. And as I mentioned, it's definitely a huge beatdown deck, so don't be afraid to lose a tower. You're really generally going to go for one massive push, or multiple massive pushes, if that makes sense. As you can see here, you know, it took one or two to get down the first tower, and now I'm going for that second tower, and it's kind of a standoff here at the very end. And I just managed to distract him with that Baby Dragon placed there. I kind of got lucky with that one, quite honestly. And, oh, I was wrong, we have 20 seconds left. But anyway, we got each other's towers down just about the same time. But you can see that, like, you have to invest heavily in that one push, and then you either struggle to defend, or you go really hard in that push and win with that massive push, or a few massive pushes. So, just, that's beatdown in a nutshell, right? It's a big snowball push is what I used to call it, because you're building up like a snowball effect. You guys know what I'm talking about? If you have like a snowball in theory and you roll it down a hill of snow, it's going to pick up more and more snow. It doesn't work perfectly, but it's like I guess idiom or like a theory or whatever, an example. And, you know, then it gets bigger and bigger. So you're going for that snowball push. You're starting with the Golem in the back, and you're putting like the Baby Dragon behind him, you're putting the Lumberjack behind him, and you're just building up this bigger and bigger snowball of units, and then just overwhelming them in one lane. So you can afford to lose one tower. Don't freak out too much if you lose one tower. It's not that big of a deal. And you can actually pretty much ignore the push in one lane, because oftentimes if you do open with like a Golem or you place a Golem in the back, they're going to try to pressure your opposite lane. And as long as it's not too massive that they're just going to 3-crown you right away, then you can generally ignore it, or just play defense a little bit. Don't overcommit to the defense, and just invest more so in that offensive push and supporting that Golem. Now, in this particular Golem deck, we only have poison instead of a lightning or a pump. I actually prefer the no pump versions. I'm not a big fan of the elixir pump or the elixir collector, whatever you want to call it, and it's just a personal preference. So you definitely have a few variations of this deck, and in this particular one you're running the poison rather than what would generally be the two alternatives, you know, which would be lightning or elixir pump. So as I mentioned, you're actually running poison in this one, and that attributes the Golem very well too, because it clears out swarm units, which generally Swarm units are a go-to counter in some cases for tanks, and seeing that the Golem is the heaviest tank in the game, you're going to be seeing things like skeleton armies, goblin gangs, minion hordes, so on and so forth being used to counter your Golem, and that's where you really take benefit from that poison, because you can place the poison down for 8 seconds or whatever it is, and it basically clears that path of safety for the Golem from any swarm units. It also fully destroys musketeers and wizards if they get in the full radius of it, or the full duration of it, and it can counter things weaker like the Dark Goblin or the Princess if you need to use it to. Negative trade for you, but it can be good because it does some damage to their tower as well. So you have the poison in there, and as I mentioned, I like this version better. I am just not a big Elixir Pump player. Like, I like it in some decks, I have played it definitely, it's great in 3 Musketeers decks and Spellbait decks, but I don't know, it's just a preference, I just don't really like playing with it. And I know it's a huge card, I know it's hugely successful, and it has, huge value and benefit, but it's just, again, it's just a matter of personal preference. I'm just not a huge fan of the playstyle involved with the Elixir Collector, and always having to, make sure to put it up at the right time, and not get it fireballed or lightninged, and just lose it to, a minor or whatever, so on and so forth, right? Alright, let's talk about another card in this deck, and that is the Tornado. Tornado gives you huge splash energy, and there's a lot of splash damage or AoE cards in this deck, and a lot of things that can benefit from the Tornado because of that. So let's look at those cards. So Tornado, as you guys know, it pulls everything together into the center, from a large radius into a small radius. It's a card that's been nerfed a bunch of times. It was really powerful when it first came out, and people were kind of figuring out how to use it. And then once they realized, oh, this card is so strong, and it started being used in more and more decks, they had to nerf it a few times. It used to last 3.5 or 4 seconds, now it's only 2.5 seconds. But it still has that same effect. It's the only card in the game that has that pull together effect, and it's the only thing that can really be used reliably, except in certain gimmicky situations, to activate your King Tower when your opponent is sending in a Hog Rider or something like that. But in this deck, you're really using it for that splash synergy. You're using it to pull everything together and to do AoE damage with all of your units and spells that can do just that. So the cards that really benefit from that kind of splash synergy effect are going to be the mostly the Baby Dragon. That's a huge part of it. Also definitely some of the spells like the Barbarian Barrel and the Poison are going to benefit from it as well, because you can pull everything together, and all these splash damage units and spells are going to be dealing damage to all of them, all of the opponent's units at once. The Golem death damage also synergizes with this, so if you pull everything in together, then your Golem's death damage will actually deal damage to everything around it. So if you pull them in right before your Golem dies, that can be a huge play, and it can give you huge value. So definitely consider that as an option. Even the Electro Dragon, it works a little bit with the Tornado, because you can pull everything in together, and it only hits 3 units, but that's still, if it's 3, spread throughout units, or spread out units, then you can pull them all in together and have the Electro Dragon chain lightning them. Alright, now what about the Lumberjack? Lumberjack is generally played behind the Golem for massive DPS. You can use him on defense for sure, and then you can use him for a counter push, but I like to use him behind the Golem, and once the Golem is across the bridge and is tanking for the Princess Tower, then the Lumberjack just wreaks havoc. And then once he dies, he drops that rage effect, and that benefits your Golem and whatever other support that you have behind that Golem. Now the Baby Dragon. Baby Dragon is another great support card behind the Golem, mostly for the splash synergy, and it also provides consistent, taking out of swarm units, and as I mentioned, that's going to be an often counter that you'll see, a go-to counter, a pretty common counter that you'll see for your Golem and other heavy units, are those swarm units, like the Minion Horde or the Goblin Gang or Skeleton Army, so on and so forth. So Baby Dragon's role is right there, and then you pull everything in with the Tornado, and then the Golem's death damage plus the Baby Dragon's AoE just obliterates it all. And this is, in theory, this is really similar to playing with just about any other splash damage unit and Tornado. Like, Ice Wizard is paired with Tornado very commonly, very strong. Executioner is a classic combination of Tornado. Sparky got a buff. If you haven't played the Sparky yet, I'll try to do a deck on Sparky soon, or a video on Sparky soon. Sparky Tornado has huge synergy. It's pretty amazing. So, that's the Baby Dragon, and that takes care of swarm units, as I mentioned. But what about the Electro Dragon? He does the opposite. It's actually to counter things like Inferno Dragons and Inferno Towers, which are going to be other very common counters to your Golem. Generally like a really heavy tanky unit, a go-to counter is an Inferno Dragon or an Inferno Tower. So that's what the Electro Dragon's main role is. So you generally are going to be using him behind your Golem or try to save on to him and use him to counter your opponent's Inferno unit when it's necessary. You can also of course interrupt things like Sparkies, but that's not going to be as common as like the Inferno Dragon or the Inferno Tower. Alright, now what else do we have in there? The Mega Minion is just normally like a cheap, reliable unit that's good for countering and killing support units. He also goes really well behind the Golem, just because he flies really slow, just like the Golem walks really slow. Alright, let's take a look at this guy here. This is a pretty funny one. He tried to activate my King Tower so many times, and then I think he just pretty much gave up, but I wanted to include it anyway. So anyway, let's move on here. That was the Mega Minion. 3 spells in this deck. It actually works out quite well since you're focusing on that big beatdown push. You don't need to worry about like getting caught with the awkward hand. Well, you do from time to time, but you're often going to be just going for a huge push, and you won't have to worry too much about doing being in an awkward situation with 3 spells. You're generally going to have a case where you can use at least one of them, or it's safe to cycle any of your other cards in the back. And speaking of that, that would be my opening moves. I actually like opening with the Golem in this deck. I don't know, it's kind of risky with a lot of Golem decks because you're running the risk of investing the 8 Elixir in the one lane, and then they could put like a Battle Ram and a Bandit in the other lane if they're running Bridge Spam, or a Hog and some Bats, or whatever, and just obliterate the other lane while you have nothing to counter it because you don't have any Elixir. But I don't know, it works out pretty well. It is a big high-risk, high-reward play, but for me it's generally worked out pretty decently. If you want to play it more safely, you can totally cycle any other cards in the back. You can use the Barbarian Barrel at the bridge even, and it sends in the Barbarian and does the damage to the tower as long as they don't counter it. So those are generally your options for opening moves. You could cycle the Lumberjack or the Mega Minion or even the E-Dragon or something in the back. Alright guys, really quickly here, card replacements, and then we'll wrap it up. For the Baby Dragon, you want another splash damage unit, like a Wizard is really powerful right now. Executioner is really great, like I mentioned, and also the Ice Wizard. For the Golem, probably another tank, like a Giant or something like that. Maybe, what else? Maybe even a Lava Hound if you want to make it a Hound deck. For the Electro Dragon, probably E-Wiz or Zappies. You want something else that has that kind of stun effect to support that Golem, so that he can be, they can rather be interrupting your opponent's Inferno Dragon, Inferno Tower, so on and so forth. For the Lumberjack, maybe like a Mini P.E.K.K.A. or another high DPS unit, like maybe even a Hunter, something that's going to go well behind that Golem. If you're early on ladder and you got high level E-Barbs, you could put maxed out or high level E-Barbs in there if you're playing it on ladder. But if you're running this in tournament standard level, definitely don't be running those E-Barbs. Just run another high DPS unit like a Mini P.E.K.K.A. or something. For the Mega Minion, maybe like regular minions or another flying unit like that. You could go again for like Mini P.E.K.K.A., something hard hitting. If you wanted a range support unit, you could just get like a Musketeer. For the Barbarian Barrel, just another light spell like Zap, Log, or Snowball. For the Poison, like I mentioned, you could do Lightning or Pump. And for the Tornado, I would not recommend switching it out for anything. If you absolutely had to, I would consider maybe a defensive structure or a spawner building would actually work out really well. But I would totally keep the Tornado in this deck for that splash synergy. Alright guys, that is it for tonight. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I appreciate all the support, and have a good night.